Hi, my name's Ed Goodall, and I'm Head of Intergovernmental Engagement at Whale and Dolphin Conservation. Thank you so much for everybody joining our event here today at the Cryosphere Pavilion, and for those of you joining online. Cetaceans are comprising of 94 species, thereabouts. We never know, we're always finding new ones, whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And they're highly intelligent marine mammals with whom we share many traits, but they are acutely vulnerable and exposed to suffering the long and short-term impacts from climate change, which are already multiple different populations and species are having their very survival threatened. They often have to respond very quickly, if indeed they can, to changes within their habitats, meaning that they are a key indicator species and a natural barometer for what is happening in the ocean. And our last report on this topic was back in 2007. So in the lead up to this COP, we've synthesized the expanded scientific understanding in the last 16 years to pull together a new report, Whales in Hot Water, which gives a comprehensive understanding of how climate change is impacting cetaceans today. So today at the Cryosphere Pavilion, we are launching our new report, Whales in Hot Water. It's available online on our website. We've got a QR code in a second, which will be up on the screen. I have quite a few hard copies, so for everybody in the room, I'm more than happy to hand them out afterwards. So the report really sets out the main ways in which climate change is impacting cetaceans, how climate change is acting as an accelerating mechanism to anthropogenic threats that they're suffering, and how recovering populations potentially may help us tackle the climate crisis. And we also lay out a suite of wide-ranging policy recommendations to avoid extinctions and promote recovery. So today I'll lay out some of the findings of the report, and then we'll hear from our esteemed panelists here, who will introduce themselves now. Tom.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Tom Hickey. I'm the project director on Pew's Coastal Wetlands and Coral Reefs program. That's effectively our international blue carbon program. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and also about another piece of work on South Georgia and South California.
Hi, I'm Dr. Heidi Pearson. I'm a professor of marine biology from the University of Alaska Southeast in Juneau. And I study marine mammal behavior, ecology, and conservation. And today I'll be talking about the role of whales in the carbon cycle.
Hello, my name is Susan Ka. I'm from Biochem in Germany, and we count whales and satellite imagery using AI, and our project is called Space.
Thank you, guys. Looking forward to hearing you talk in a bit. So, as you may have gathered already, this report sets out a lot of rather concerning issues for whales and dolphins, but we will come on to some good news and hear from some great initiatives from science and monitoring to meaningful spatial protection later on in the session. So it does get better. Don't worry. But I'm going to run through some of these major impacts now with a focus on the polar regions. However, we don't have time to dig into all of them, so please give the QR code a scan to get access to the full report, which went live today. And I just want to give a thanks to Her Deepness, Sylvia Earle, who very kindly provided a forward for this report, but we had a schedule clash, so she wasn't actually available to come here and speak, which is a great shame. But thank you, Sylvia Earle. So we'll just dig into some of these impacts now. So sea surface temperature is one of the primary indicators of habitat suitability for cetaceans, and is being drastically altered by climate change. And like all mammals, whales and dolphins are endothermic and need to maintain a constant body temperature. So for cetaceans to live outside of their preferred temperature ranges requires additional energy expenditure, increases in stress responses, and potentially weakens their immune systems. And this has implications for the survival of both individuals and populations. And it's known with virtual certainty that the ocean will continue to warm throughout the 21st century, with estimates under IPCC's business as usual scenario, which shows that by 2100, it's very likely that the top 2,000 meters of the ocean will have absorbed up to 5 to 7 times more heat than the observed accumulation of ocean heat since 1970. Under several scenarios, areas hosting marine mammals, which are most vulnerable to increased temperatures, places like the North Pacific Ocean, Greenland Sea, and the Barents Sea, have already undergone temperature increases 2 to 3 times higher than changes to the global mean surface temperature over the past 150 years. As well as long-term temperature changes, there are marine heat waves happening in the ocean as well, which are a period of time where abnormally high temperature is recorded relative to the average seasonal temperature of the water. Occurrence of these marine heat waves has increased by 50% over just the last decade, and now they're happening for longer and with increased frequency. They also lead to extreme weather events, which have indirect impacts on and direct impacts on marine mammal populations as well. So thinking about habitats and where cetaceans live, they exploit a huge range of differing habitats, with even ranging amongst their different subpopulations, from the cold polar regions to the world's greatest rivers. The different species are incredibly well adapted to their surroundings. And the well-being of these animals is highly dependent on their habitats being able to meet their particular needs. And cetaceans are restricted. Cetaceans with restricted geographical distributions and limited habitat tolerances will find it harder to adapt to changing conditions. Others might actually see it as a benefit, and they'll be able to adapt more easily. This slide on the screen shows narwhals who favor dense ice cover for protection from predation, but also as a potential means to navigate and access predictable prey. And the narwhal's annual migration exposes them to sea ice, which is constantly expanding and receding, and narwhals rely on cracks in that ice to move and breathe. And on occasion, they may be susceptible to becoming trapped in the ice. And climate change, changes in the polar regions, in particular in the Arctic, is changing how ice moves around, and we're seeing increased evidence of these entrapments, which can lead to reduction in population fitness and population reduction as well. So thinking about their prey. So research is suggesting that shifts in the range of marine species are occurring 4 times faster than terrestrial species, with increasing evidence that there's a poleward shift for many cetacean species as they look to follow their prey. In the Southern Ocean, warming has already begun to impact prey species such as krill, which have undergone a 30% decline in density in some areas just since the 1980s. And recent studies show that the breeding success of different species of whales can be determined by krill availability. Modeling has concluded that climate change will continue to drive a decrease in krill biomass, with the issue being echoed throughout the ocean, illustrated by a projected 19 and 16 decline in 90% and 16% decline in the Pacific and Atlantic regions, respectively, by 2100. Certain species of whale cover exceptionally long migrations. Gray whales migrate between Mexico and Arctic waters, which is around 15,000 kilometers annually. And as capital breeders with limited energy reserves and only a 4 to 5 month feeding season, disruption to prey availability in the Arctic can have knock-on impacts to individuals who require a large amount of energy to undergo that migration and successfully rear their offspring. Warming in the Arctic and ice retreat has made some feeding areas for grey whales more accessible for longer timeframes, but has coincided with a decline in overall prey biomass, as well as a change in distribution and quality of that prey. And while that poleward shift in North Pacific grey whales has already been observed, poleward shift has already been observed, rising water temperatures alongside changes in benthic productivity caused by retreating sea ice is likely leading to a continued decline in prey availability. That means that the short-term benefits of being able to access additional feeding areas is more than counteracted by long-term decline in the food that they're obtaining. So in our report, we also cover increasing prevalence of harmful algal blooms, deoxygenation, acidification, disease, and extreme weather events, which are all having varying extensive impacts for species across all geographies, not just in the polar regions. This is very much a global issue. Increasing ocean temperatures leads to a reduction in the ocean's ability to retain oxygen, which has rapid deleterious effects on marine life, which directly and indirectly affects cetaceans. And we're seeing the expansion of these oxygen depleted areas all over the world. Increased CO2 leads to increases in oceanic pH level, reducing the ability of animals with calcareous exoskeletons to produce their hard shells, reducing fitness in those populations, and abundance, leading to other cetacean-related cetacean-related fitness as well. But I haven't got time to go into all of these, so please just give that code a scan and have a look on the report. And thinking about anthropogenic impacts, there's a wide array of modern day threats to cetaceans, many of which are made worse by climate change. So as sea ice extents reduce every year, new shipping routes are opening up, which brings noise and ship strike risks into new areas which have previously been a safe haven for different species. As other marine populations and as humans need more food, there's increasing fishing activity, which inevitably leads to more human cetacean interactions. Bycatch and entanglements are the leading cause of death for cetaceans globally, and there are serious concerns on food availability for whales and dolphins in the Southern Ocean, where krill fishing is expanding at an exponential rate. The root cause of all of this, though, is the climate crisis and fossil fuel extraction, and that industry causes both noise and chemical pollution to the ocean, leading to lethal or sublethal impacts. Like I said, you can find all of these details in the report. This slide is a cardinal sin. I apologize, there's lots of text on that. But we do make an array of policy impacts, policy suggestions and recommendations for governments and industries for various different sectors. So please do have a look at that. I won't dig into all of them now. And that's it from me. So yeah, the QR code will be available again at the end of the session. I'll start handing over to our speakers now. So now over to Heidi Pearson.
Thank you so much, Ed, for that great overview, great but sobering overview of impacts of climate change on cetaceans. And what I'm going to share with you today is some of my work in the role of whale recovery in forming a holistic, nature positive vision. So we know there are many benefits and reasons to conserve whales. We know there are intrinsic and cultural and spiritual and moral reasons to conserve them. We know that they are ecosystem engineers. They transform their environment to the benefit of themselves and other species. And they enhance biodiversity. They are critical parts of the ocean. They increase ecosystem health, productivity, and resilience, which can also help the ocean to perhaps respond better to future change. One of the emerging fields of thought is if whale conservation or whale recovery can also result in climate benefits. And that's what my work has been focusing on for the past few years in Alaska. And we recently published a paper in the journal Tree last year. I invite you to check that out. It provides a current state of knowledge of the role of whales in the carbon cycle. So looking a bit more broadly, this figure shows the various ecosystem functions of whales, which are highlighted in yellow. On this figure, we also have ecosystem functions of other marine vertebrates. I'm not going to have time to go into that, but this story map is published online. It was a collaboration with Grid Arendal in Norway. So if we just look at whales and their ecosystem functions, we have 4 pathways, and I'm just going to go through them briefly. We have these direct pathways for storing and sequestering carbon. So whales, they're big, they live a long time, so they can store lots of carbon. When they die, these big carcasses oftentimes sink to the seafloor, and that carbon then becomes sequestered in the deep sea for thousands of years, perhaps longer. And then we have these indirect functions where whales essentially fertilize the surface waters with their byproducts. The thing that I'm looking at is whale poop. It's really rich in nutrients, and this can help to enhance primary productivity in the ocean, spurring up the bottom of the food web. And also it could potentially have some carbon benefits as well, but those pathways with carbon and nutrient fertilization are still pretty unknown, but we're trying to make progress towards better understanding that. So this concept of ocean fertilization by whales, the term was coined by Joe Roman. It's called the whale pump. So essentially whales are feeding at depth and they are coming to the surface to poop. These fecal plumes, as we call them, are rich in nutrients that phytoplankton need to live and grow.
phytoplankton take up CO2 themselves, but they also help to spur the entire oceanic food web. So we're studying this right now in Southeast Alaska. I have a graduate student, Dana Block, who's shown there. And one of the first things we're doing is we're getting a very comprehensive look at the oceanography of the area, because we need to understand how the ocean is behaving to understand what the impact of these whale nutrients might be. We're also directly collecting poop, as you can see in that figure, and then we're measuring if that poop can then be taken up by phytoplankton in incubation experiments. And this work is funded by Whale and Dolphin Conservation as part of their Green Whale campaign. So we have some key questions in this concept of whale carbon. It's gained a lot of interest. It's a really attractive scientific question, because we can conserve whales and we know we have biodiversity benefits. Can we have carbon and potentially climate benefits as well? We don't really know the full scale yet. We have a pretty good handle on how much carbon whales store in their bodies during their lifetime. We have a pretty good handle on how much of that carbon can make it down to the deep sea when those whale carcasses sink. The less known pathways are those indirect pathways. So how whales can bring those nutrients from depth to the surface and rev up the bottom of the food chain. And then what does that mean for carbon? So we have lower to higher scientific confidence, which is actually inversely proportional to the carbon potential. So those indirect pathways, those nutrient provisioning pathways, have the potential to be impactful for carbon cycling overall, but we just need more information to fully understand the full scale. What we do know about whales is that they were decimated by industrial whaling. Most great whale populations, so sperm whales plus baleen whales, were severely decimated during the 20th century due to large-scale industrial whaling. Many populations have still not recovered. If we look at the carbon benefits of that, we see an overall 90% decrease in the amount of carbon either fixed, stored, or sequestered as a result of cetaceans' natural actions. And so if we could restore whales to their pre-whaling abundance, it's possible we could regain these carbon benefits and also these ecosystem and biodiversity benefits as well. So in closing, if we're thinking about including whale conservation in nature-based solutions, we need to be looking at their full recovery, this additionality to the system. And of course, as Ed mentioned, conservation has to occur in tandem with direct and dramatic cuts to greenhouse gas emissions. But yet we know that cetacean ecosystem functions are important. They've been recognized internationally by the International Whaling Commission and the Convention on Migratory Species. So overall, I'd like to advocate for the precautionary principle for conserving whales. We know that there's many benefits to conserve them, biodiversity benefits, and potentially these carbon benefits as well. So thank you so much. All right, next up we have Tom Hickey.
Oh, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tom Hickey. I'm the project director at Pew's Coastal Wetlands and Coral Reefs project. And in a previous life, I actually worked on our marine conservation or marine habitat conservation program. So I'm going to actually start off talking a little bit about that. But before I do, Pew's Coastal Wetlands and Coral Reefs project is a body of work that looks to support countries who have the ambition to protect or restore their blue carbon mangrove seagrasses and salt marshes as a component of their nationally determined contributions. I doubt many of you actually need any education on the benefit of blue carbon ecosystem based on this COP, but they provide that measurable mitigation benefit recognized by IPCC guidance, but they also provide a whole range of benefits in helping communities adapt and become more resilient to the impacts of climate change. So they're a brilliant example of what nature-based solutions can contribute. And I think if we'd had this discussion 5 years ago in the context of whales, there'd have been a few furrowed brows, but increasingly, as Heidi's work alludes to, the understanding of the potential benefit of whales through that lens of blue carbon is becoming a very live topic, and I'll come back to that at the end. But as I say, previous to this role, I worked for Pew's or supported Pew's marine habitat conservation team on South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands, a territory I suspect many of you will be pretty familiar with, about 2,500 miles north, 1,500 miles north of Antarctica, about 1,700 miles southeast
of South America, a British overseas territory. No permanent population, but an incredibly biodiverse place, 5 species of penguin, endemic bird species, and critically, this the conversation, a site of whale recovery, particularly blue and baleen whales, which historically has not been the case. Of course, the centre of operations for whaling in the Southern Ocean in the 1900s. I believe South Georgia first started whaling operations in 1904 with about 200 whales taken that year alone. And within 6 years, increasing number of operations, not just British, but Norwegian and Argentine. And 12 years later, the largest centre of whaling in the region. By 1966, about 175,000 whales recorded as having been processed on South Georgia alone, within something like a million or over a million across the whole region. Thankfully, in South Georgia, South Sandwich Islands, that is a slightly more positive story now. So there's increasing evidence of whale recovery, and that was one of the reasons why in 2012, the government of South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands declared a marine protected area. At that time, in 2012, a reasonably modest portion of the territory was designated as fully protected, about 2%, 20,000 kilometres, the rest operating as a managed fishery. The MPA is, however, reviewed every 5 years, and in 2018, that area of fully protected waters was extended to about 23%, about 250,000 additional kilometres. A project I was very happy to work on with colleagues. And for the mathematicians in the room, you will work out that we're currently in 2023 and therefore in another cycle of the MPA review. A large and growing number of organisations are calling for that review to fully protect the South Islands. The benefits of doing so, I suspect, are self-evident to the room, but South Georgia, South Sandwich Islands, like everywhere on the planet, is feeling the impacts of climate change, lowest sea ice levels recorded on record this year, associated penguin and seal die-offs, the kind of increasing pressure that Ed has alluded to on the krill fisheries in the region, in addition to the impacts such as avian flu, which unfortunately has now reached South Georgia as well. The MPA would not, of course, in its own right, address all of those climate impacts. It's not going to immediately reduce emissions, but it will increase the resilience of the area to the impacts of climate change, as well as those wider impacts that I alluded to. And this is particularly salient at a time when we know that the political dynamics of the CAMLAR Convention are causing more and more pressure on krill stocks in particular. So our hope is that the review, which is actually entering its final stages, will provide some pretty ambitious recommendations to the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office as to the opportunity for protections around South Georgia. My colleagues are at key meetings next week where I hope they'll be able to say a little bit more. Just briefly on the kind of link to blue carbon, the work that my project does, I would echo the rigor that Heidi alluded to earlier. I think when we're talking about mangrove seagrass and salt marshes, the distinct advantage they have over whales is that they don't move too much, which means when we're measuring those carbon flows, those pathways, it's a little easier, but it's also about managing those pathways. So in this place in COP, when we're talking about the measurable contribution that any action can make to a country's emission reduction strategy, it's not just about measuring that carbon flux, but about apportioning responsibility to the management and additionality of that flux. And that's critical, right? We need to be very, very thoughtful, given where we are, given the imperative to reduce emissions. We need to be very, very thoughtful about making that distinction between the capacity of any species and ecosystem in the global carbon cycle and our ability to measurably remove carbon from that cycle. The second observation I would have, which I think vigorously agrees with both Heidi and Ed as well, is that we should be similarly thoughtful about reducing everything to a single metric of carbon. I think it's really, really important that we assess that and think about that in our work, because ultimately reducing emissions is the defining challenge of our time. But it's also okay if we think about those wider benefits. One of the biggest takeaways we have from our work on blue carbon and NDCs internationally is that these blue carbon ecosystems are incredibly powerful in a place like this, but carbon's often quite an abstract concept to a lot of local users, communities, people. My colleague, Dr. Stacey Byers, says no one catches carbon, which I think is worth keeping in mind, because in this instance, it's okay to say that whales are awesome. Protecting whales and the habitats they rely on because they're awesome is a perfectly valid position as well. So I look forward to further engagement with Heidi and others on kind of growing consideration of those carbon benefits, and hopefully good news from the UK government on South Sandwich Islands. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So my name is Julika and I'm from the Space Whale team. And as I already said, we count whales in satellite imagery using AI, but I would like to start a bit different. So we rely on our oceans. Actually, more than 90% of heat excess has been absorbed by the ocean for human activity. And every second breath we take comes from our oceans. Besides, our oceans regulate the temperatures. Otherwise, the poles would be incredibly cold and the equator would be incredibly hot. Only with our oceans, we are able to live in Ecuador or Tromsø or Alaska or wherever we come from. So we rely on our oceans, not our oceans rely on us. And therefore, it's amazing that we already protected 8% of our oceans. But we also need to rely on our oceans in the future. And therefore, we decided already that we want to protect 30% of our oceans as marine protected areas. However, at the moment, more than 80% of our oceans are unexplored, unmapped, and unobserved. So where to actually designate these marine protected areas if we've basically no idea where a high biodiversity is? And this is where new technologies like space come into this game. So this is actually the image which was taken by the Apollo 8 crew in 1968. And this was the first time when we human beings saw the Earth from above, like from the moon. And you might also remember how Sir David Attenborough tried to just like get a live connection to the Apollo 8 crew, and he was really struggling. But now technology considerably improved, so we can even see whales from space. And this is actually my favorite image. So on the one hand side, you have the drone footage, and on the other hand side, you have the satellite imagery. And you can see a blue whale actually. And blue whales are critically endangered. And you have other critically endangered species, like for example, vaquita, where you know you have less than 10 animals, or northern right whales, North Atlantic right whales, where you know you have less than 350 animals left. But blue whales, even though they are the largest animal on Earth, we've basically no idea how many there are, if there are 5,000 or 25,000 animals. So this is why we did a study over here in Mexico to actually have a look where the animals are, how many there are, and when they are in certain areas. And you can perfectly see the shape of the blue whale in the satellite imagery. But if you have been on a boat before, you might also recognize that most of the time you only see parts of the whale. So this is another image from a blue whale, and you can perfectly see how it's going down here. So you can only see the back of the whale, which is above the water surface, and the rest is already beneath the water surface. We also saw some humpback whales, and I think all of you have already seen some whales on TV, and they mostly show humpback whales because they are so playful and they are really creating a lot of waves. And this is actually a humpback whale, which is flapping with its flipper on the water surface. So again, in drone footage and in satellite imagery. So we can also see this kind of behavior. Or for example, here you have a humpback whale, which is just like going down. But now also for us, sometimes it's just like difficult seeing all of these features in an area. If you have, for example, 4,000 square kilometers, you will get exhausted. So this is why we are using artificial intelligence to actually count the whales. And afterwards, we do a manual review to really verify that the objects which were identified by the algorithm are actually whales. And we already did studies off the coast of 5 continents so far. And my favorite study actually was a study in New Zealand where we counted southern right whales. And you can already see some southern right whales on the satellite imagery. And sorry, my pointer's not working, but the red box, you will actually see like half a circle. And then the white part beneath, this is actually the head, and then you can see perfectly the adult southern right whale. But then there's also another white part over there, and this is actually a calf. So we're really able to see mother calf pairs. And we were also wondering, like, and what about numbers from boat? So this is why we teamed up with people from the University of Auckland to actually compare numbers. And they did a boat-based survey. So they were on a boat using binoculars and counting the whales. And they saw 41 southern right whales, mothers and calves. And 12 hours later, we actually did a snapshot of this area. And we also counted 41 southern right whales. So we showed that numbers are validated. And now at the moment, we are doing a study together with Whale and Dolphin Conservation, where for the first time, our data are used to designate important marine mammal areas and marine protected areas. And 4,000 square kilometers, this sounds huge. It's like 600,000 soccer pitches. However, on the other hand side, if you compare it to Dubai, for example, it's less than Dubai. And if you compare it to the Indian Ocean, it's actually 0.01% of the Indian Ocean. So it's such a tiny part of the Indian Ocean, what we are covering at the moment. Therefore, we would really like to scale this in the future. And the good news is that the technology is already in place. So the satellites are launched and they are passing the Earth every day anyway. And the good news is also that our algorithm is already in place. And Ed already mentioned all of the threads we have. So we know we have the threads and we know we can collect the data. So now we just need to do the next step for actually also collecting the data and then implementing solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julika, and everybody on the panel. Fascinating to hear everything that everybody's doing to try and protect and restore whale populations. So we've got a little bit more time now for questions from the audience, or if we have any questions from online.
So one of our viewers is saying they live on the East Coast of Australia. Is there anything they can do as an average person to help?
Would anybody from the panel like to take that? I'm happy to leave it again. So yeah, the average person, I think, when we're thinking about species protection and ocean protection, it's really thinking about things that you're doing in your everyday life, because everything has an impact on the ocean. Our organization is based in the UK. It's an island nation. 80% of goods get shipped, and so there's an impact there, and there's a supply chain that goes back across different oceans and different countries. We know that plastic is ending up in the ocean, and that's reducing the fitness of multiple species, not just whales and dolphins. So it's being conscious about your use of resources and again, that supply chain of those resources. Also responsible food choices as well. We know that the ocean is massively overfished, many fish populations. And we talk about fish populations as in human consumption, but actually we need those fish in the ocean for whales to be able to eat those fish populations and keep a healthy system overturning. So you can always link back everything that we're doing back to the ocean and the species that live in it. So I think there's a big becoming conscious about those consumer choices that we make. Anybody would like to add to that? No? Okay. Do we have any more from online, maybe?
We have one more. After a week of talk, is there anything that you're looking forward to seeing in terms of outcomes from week 2?
Has anybody been following the negotiations more than I have?
I mean, I'm looking forward to week 2 of COP being done, actually. But I'm always. I think more generally with this COP, I'm sort of struck by the saying that it's possible for 2 things to be true at the same time. I think the wider trajectory of this COP and the sort of warnings that we are all hearing now about we really are on the last chance still to make some pretty dramatic changes now are very valid. At the same time, with the work that our team have been doing, it's pretty hard not to get to a conversation that is in some way focused on nature and the oceans. But a few people now say that it's not at the kids' table anymore, which is fantastic. You know, there's some brilliant people, brilliant countries
doing fantastic work. And certainly that's becoming more and more institutionalized within the workings of the UNFCCC. So we have the annual Ocean Climate Dialogue that occurs now at the Bonn intercessional meetings. Certainly the negotiation text will recognize the outcomes and recommendations of that dialogue. But I think what we are all hearing now is that we need to hear action as much as ambition. So my hope is that the kind of growing caucus of interest, particularly from countries and the actions that they're taking, grows exponentially. We keep seeing more and more countries taking decisive action, not just for their nature-based solutions, but on their other components of their climate strategies, because we have to.
Thank you, Neil. Do we have any questions from the room?
Yeah, the kind of recovery of whales after the moratorium on whaling is one of those things that just kind of fills you with hope, and you can see how different populations have recovered, and then now there's this kind of, we need to save them again. There's this whole other threat, and I just wonder whether you've got any sense that if we did everything right, we stopped all the harms, we kind of protect all the habitats, this idea of re-whaling the ocean, their populations fully recovering, how long do you think that would take? I know they all breed at different rates, but is it possible? And how many generations before we might see something like that?
That's a great question. And would you like me to answer that, panel? Okay.
Sure.
I think your question was very good. And you mentioned that if we did everything right, so of course, limiting climate change to 1.5, reducing ship strikes, reducing noise pollution, fisheries entanglements, plastics, the list goes on. So in a dream scenario where we do that and we give whales time and space to recover, they can. But their lives are so slow. You know, humpback whales, which I study in Alaska, they live to be 80 years or so. A female will have a calf once every 2 or 3 years, starting at about age 6 to 10 or so. And those reproductive rates vary quite widely between species. But I like to be an optimistic person, and I think they can recover if we let them. We do have some success stories. So again, I study humpback whales in the North Pacific, and most of those populations, or I should say most of the populations of humpback whales globally are considered recovered, including the population I study in the North Pacific. And so they have been able to come back. That's not the case with all whales, but I think if we do our part in reducing the risks as much as possible, they will do their part in reproducing and thriving on the planet.
I think we have another question over here.
Yeah, thank you. Sofika Kostic, Managing Director at Aquatic Life Institute. We advocate for aquatic animal welfare. So this is really interesting, but we look at aquatic animals that are caught in the global food system, which whales to a large degree are not, just thankfully, just in a few instances. But to me, it seems like, that's the megafauna and, so relatable, so iconic of ocean health, but their food sources are at extreme risk, right? From overfishing, and that's the microfauna, so the krill. Do any of you focus on that sort of food system, I guess, for the whales? Because it seems to me that industrial fishing is sort of the last greatest threat, not directly on the whale populations, but to their ability to recover and thrive. Is there, do any of you focus on advocacy efforts? Because I think I saw, on your slide, and I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but there was like the little diagram at the bottom that was like vessels and then krill and whale. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So there is a program at Pew that works within CAMLOT, looking at both protected areas, but also the sustainable management of the krill fisheries,
Okay.
Advocating for exactly what you've just called for, frankly, precautionary approaches to those fisheries. It's a tricky convention to work with at the moment. there are broader political dynamics which I think kind of dictate some of those outcomes. But one of the reasons, therefore, why we also look at some of the territories which are also managed by individual countries, like the UK. So South Georgia, South Sandwich Islands is a UK overseas territory, but it operates its fisheries within that convention framework. So there are some opportunities there to disentangle the politics slightly and make progress. And I think your broader point is the right one, right? We now are at a point where we need to make those bold steps in being precautionary about spatial measures, but also in terms of fisheries governance, because whether it's for carbon, whether it's for global protein supply, we really are stretching our limits in just about every aspect. So yes, very happy, of course, to connect you with colleagues to talk a bit more in detail.
Nice, thanks.
I think we had another question in the back.
Actually, a few.
Sure.
So thanks. I'm also not monitoring assessment problem. Thanks, first of all, to very nice introduction. My first question is actually a follow-up of the previous one. As you say, like a lot of those species in UK have quite an extensive migration route. I'm more familiar with the Arctic ones, and this is some of them going down to Caribbean, places like that, which requires, of course, some kind of you are within two different national regimes, and in addition, we do see we also presented some in some reports. Some of those species are heavily burdened by contaminants like PCBs and other that possible. Yeah, that's not so nice. It's like on kilohertz, for instance, which often requires some kind of international regulation. So can you say, first question is to say something about the potential when it comes to national and national foundation on managing these issues? What is the potential for revitalization of all the areas, as you say? That's first question.
So that one first.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I can come on to that one. Unless anybody else would like to say. We do have an international convention for managing whale populations. That was originally why I set up for the purpose for exploitative purposes. But over the last few decades, since the moratorium, the International Whaling Commission has moved towards a more sort of pro-conservation status, and there are a lot of really good initiatives through the IWC to conserve whales, and they have programs of conservation management plans for individual species and subpopulations, and that is really that cross like the range throughout the species. You need all of those countries coming through to that process so that you can think about the threats throughout the ranges for those individual species, and then we can think about the protections that are needed throughout the range, and it's really collaborative. But of course, what we need is countries to be participating in that process. There's only 87 or 88 members to the International Whaling Commission, but we would really encourage countries, not even just coastal states, but landlocked nations as well, because it benefits the whales for the global system, to join and take a pro-conservation stance and work collaboratively and internationally on that process, because it has worked, and there's great conservation management plans that have been created for a few species, and it's just and the commission can bring that kind of structure and the expertise importantly through that process.
I think I was more thinking about, I'm a little aware about the International Whaling Commission, but also what the side effects, like as you mentioned, noise, history of other species or predator species and so on, which make it a bit more complex.
So all of those things are built into the conservation management plan, and all of the threats to those populations are tailored for the threats, and then there's integration with those countries to be able to understand how to tackle them. So it is something that's done through that. One other thing that's kind of linked to that is WDC has a partnership with the IUCN and a couple of other groups on a project called Important Marine Mammal Areas, where we're mapping those important life stages and migratory routes for all marine mammals, not just whales and dolphins, so we can understand those particular areas that we absolutely must protect, because you can't just bring in protections in one place. You need, if they're migratory rights, you need to protect them throughout their ranges. We've surveyed, I think, 2/3 of the global ocean now. It's a multi-year project, but it's really giving really key and scientifically underpinned data set that will inform marine protected area designation and marine spatial planning specifically for marine mammals to inform development. So. And you had another question.
It was more about the remote sensing, and I was wondering if it's sorry to see how you use AI to kind of detect diseases. I was wondering about if you measure like non-detection, like what is the probability of not detecting whales? I mean, you obviously evaluate the probability detection, but what about negative?
Yeah. So actually, what we did is that we also, I didn't talk about that study, but we also did a study in the Mediterranean Sea where actually we teamed up with British Antarctic Surveys because they are also really experienced in this field, and they were counting the whales totally manually. And then we were running our algorithm afterwards doing the manual verification. And what we observed is that we nearly detected twice as many whales as they detected because they just had missing whales. If you have an area of 4,000 square kilometers, and you have like 700 images of water and then one image of whale and I showed some of you, sometimes they are really just like small in the image, you might just like miss the whale. So this is why it's for us more effective going that way. And then on the other hand, there was also another study in North America where they actually did a citizen science project because they said like, okay, I mean, it's amazing. Everybody loves whales and most of the people also love space. So why don't we say like everybody can just like detect whales in satellite imagery? So everybody was really excited about the project. And actually the people said like, well, this is a whale and this is a whale. And they counted 10 times more whales than there actually have been because everybody saw a whale in a wave. So this is why we noticed that both approaches are not working. Either you do it manually with just like an expert team and they might miss some whales, or you do a citizen science project and everybody's so excited that they just like see a whale in every wave. And this is why we noticed that for us, it's just like the most effective way using AI and then afterwards the manual verification, because I showed several images to you and sometimes you only see the fluke, sometimes you see a flipper. And on the other hand, if you imagine you have a paddle boat, like a boat and the paddles, might also look like a half whale for an algorithm. So this is why you still need the manual review to really verify that everything which is detected by an algorithm is actually a whale and not a paddle boat.
Great. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Sure.
I have one about still whale pump, because I also work with the carbon pump, but with like smaller organisms. And I'm wondering how you measure the events, like because they're very sporadic, I imagine. And how do you estimate their like contributions to the global budget? Because
Yes, and that is something we are looking to do. We actually have a research proposal to look at that. So what we're doing right now empirically in Southeast Alaska is measuring properties of the water, measuring properties of the poop, and then doing these incubation experiments, basically as like proof of concept. Does this work and how does it work? But we don't yet know what that might mean for carbon budgets. And so what we hope to be able to do is to put in some of these empirical data inputs that our team is collecting and other groups we're working with, and then feed them all into a global Earth system model, which will basically add whales as an effect into these models that simulate carbon and nutrient fluxes throughout the global ocean. And so we're hoping to do that when funding is in hand. We're working with WDC because that's a really important question to get at this answer of, does it even make a difference? Because we have, of course, the biological carbon pump, which draws down like 4 to 12 gigatons a year. And so we want to know what is the scale of the whale effect compared to that. But I'd love to speak with you more about the work you're doing. Yeah, thank you.
Do we have anything else in the room? We have a few more minutes. So maybe I'll ask one question I have from my list here. So, Tom, how do you think we could take the learnings from MPA enhancements around South Suda and South Sandwich Islands out into the high seas? We have a burgeoning treaty for that. Just throwing that one at you.
Good question. I think so. What we see in South Georgia, South Sandwich Islands is the potential for a very healthy mix between very well managed fisheries and very high levels of protection. And sometimes there's sort of a false dichotomy created between those two, but it's one or the other. The government of South Georgia, South Sandwich Islands, I think, is quite rightly proud of some of the measures that it's taken, particularly for the two fish operation around them, in terms of reducing bycatch, in terms of the amount of stock that is taken. So I think as we look to sort of develop templates for those high seas MPAs, it's very possible for us to have very well managed fisheries and have very high levels of protection at scale. And we're going to need to do both. We're going to need to have that approach and not one or the other. I think the other thing that South Georgia, South Sandwich Island has done, and I hope they will continue to do, is put in place that precautionary approach, to not wait for there to be a problem. And I think that is the opportunity with South Sandwich Islands. It's been noted that while krill fisheries could occur in South Sandwich Islands, they haven't operated for 30 years, but that is a really good reason to protect it, because I think what we've learned so far with marine protections is if we wait for there to be a problem before we do something, it's quite likely that there will be a problem. So while we have those opportunities to be precautionary, but to be both ambitious in both levels of protection and the standard of fisheries, we should take them.
Great answer. Ulrika, how do you see counting whales from space being useful beyond conservation we talked about today?
I think every decision we do should be based on data, irrespective of it's now here at COP28 or in our everyday life. And I think, so for example, when having a look on space well, obviously we can use space well data for designating marine protected areas and conservation. But of course, you also need data when, for example, doing offshore wind farm studies. So you need baseline data, like how many whales have we had before, and then what is the impact when just like building an offshore wind farm. Or on the other hand side, also for the topic finance, because I mean, like all of our research studies actually depend on finance. So here at COP, we're also talking a lot about blue finance, and then having a look on TNFDs, on blue carbon credits, on biodiversity credits. Also, all of these factors always depend on data. So this is why it's really important, and data should actually be the baseline for every decision we do.
Couldn't agree more. And leading into that, Heidi, so what are the kind of next steps when we're thinking about marine mammals like whales and how they could potentially contribute to climate change mitigation?
Yes, and so this follows up on my answer to your question about the whale pump. So we need to get a handle on how these processes work. How do they behave in different parts of the ocean? Because whales are, they're not continuously distributed across the ocean. They have these hot spots and hot moments where whales are. So do they have an impact when they come together in these hot spots? And then are those nutrients that they're bringing to the surface, are they just going to be recycled in surface waters and taken up by phytoplankton and recycled through the food web? Or are they new nutrients that the whales are bringing up that wouldn't be there otherwise? And that's the big piece to understand with, if we're talking about carbon export or carbon sequestration, is if they're bringing up new nutrients that otherwise wouldn't be in the food web, what could that mean for carbon budget? So those are just a couple of the things that we need to get a better handle on.
Yeah, it's exciting to be working with you on that. So I just thought we'd wrap up. So, we've just started week 2. Everyone's very tired, but there's a lot to get done this week. So I just thought maybe we could just reflect, the panel would like to reflect on kind of what keeps you doing these jobs and what kind of gives you hope as we go into the week. So, Ulrika, I'll come to you first.
What gives me hope is that we have already everything. So we have the technology, we know what we want to do, we agreed already on several things, and now we can implement solutions, and we have to implement the solutions. And this is also what keeps me going, because I mean, we agreed on these. For example, we agreed that we will protect 30% by 2030, but we also have to implement this now, and this keeps me doing.
Yeah.
Dolphin. No, I think similarly that there's a bit of a fable now in the blue carbon kind of world that
the first COP where blue carbon was discussed, I think it was in Cancun, and there were more audience members than panelists. And now you can't move without discussing the potential of that. So I think that sort of exponential growth, the quality of people and partners doing that work gives us a lot of cause for hope. Albeit we need to continue that kind of exponential growth.
Sure. And Heidi, what kind of gives you hope and why do you keep doing this work?
Well, I got into the career that I'm in because I really am passionate about animal conservation, and I believe they have a right to exist on this planet just as much as we do. And I'm driven by key scientific questions, but I strive to make my science make a difference in the practical world, and especially for conservation. So I think what keeps me going is just I'm so fascinated by whales, and will continue to be fascinated and advocate for their protection.
Yeah, and following Heidi, I was lucky enough to go and visit a research project this summer in Alaska, and that's what keeps me going, is seeing those whales, just seeing 12 bubble net feeding humpback whales just emerge from the water in a pristine landscape. Just, that's why we all do it. We love this planet. We love the animals that live here. And when I'm in a hard moment in my job, I just transport myself, my mind back to Alaska to see those whales. That's what keeps doing it for nibbler and chompers. So thanks everybody for coming along, for your interest in our work. Thank you to everybody online. I've got a few copies of the report under here if anybody would like one. But yeah, thanks very much. And for our panelists, please.